The scream tore through the delivery room like a serrated blade, raw and primal. Claire Ellison's face contorted in agony, sweat mixing with tears as she gripped the hospital bed rails. Her knuckles had gone white 40 minutes ago. "Push harder, Mrs. Ellison!" Dr. Martinez barked, his gloved hands slick with blood. "I can see the head!" Nate Ellison stood frozen beside his wife, watching her body convulse with each contraction. 38 hours of labor had transformed his elegant, composed wife into something feral, something desperate. "Come on, baby," he whispered, stroking her damp hair. "Almost there." Claire's eyes rolled back, showing only whites. Another scream ripped from her throat, and suddenly the room filled with the wet, sliding sound of birth. A tiny, blood-covered body emerged into the harsh fluorescent light. Silence, then a piercing cry. "It's a girl, doctor." Martinez lifted the infant, umbilical cord pulsing purple between them. "She's perfect." Nate's vision blurred with tears. 5 years. 5 freaking years of trying, of failed treatments, of watching Claire's desperation grow like a cancer between them. And now, the nurse cleaned the baby and placed her in Claire's trembling arms. Nate leaned closer, ready to meet his daughter for the first time. Then his world tilted sideways. The baby's hair was bright copper red, almost glowing under the surgical lights. Not brown like his, not blonde like Claire's. Red as fresh blood. "She's got red hair," he said, voice barely audible. Claire smiled weakly, not meeting his eyes. "She's beautiful." Nate stared at the infant, their daughter. His mind raced through genetics, through family trees, through every photo he'd ever seen of both their families. No red hair, anywhere, ever. "Must be recessive," Claire murmured, adjusting the blanket around the baby. "My great-uncle Charlie had red hair. These things skip generations." The lie hit him like ice water. Claire had no great-uncle Charlie. He'd memorized her entire family history during their courtship, had listened to every story, seen every photo. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Must be." But as he looked down at his daughter's tiny face, that cold feeling in his gut started spreading. 1 week later, Julia Meadows' colonial house felt like a mausoleum. Too big, too quiet, filled with the ghosts of better times. She'd insisted they stay with her while adjusting to parenthood, claiming she needed the company. But Nate suspected she just wanted to be close to Claire during this vulnerable time. The sisters had always been protective of each other. "Emma's finally asleep," Claire said, emerging from the nursery with dark circles under her eyes. The baby had been colicky all week, screaming for hours at a time. "I'm going to shower." Nate nodded from the rocking chair, his own exhaustion bone deep. "Take your time. I'll listen for her." As the water started running upstairs, silence settled over the house. Julia had gone to the grocery store, leaving him alone with his thoughts and his doubts. He found himself wandering the hallways, studying the family photos that lined the walls. Claire and Julia as gap-toothed children. Their parents at various holidays, Julia's wedding to Tom Meadows 10 years ago. Tom, the man who died in that car crash when Emma was barely... No, that wasn't right. Tom had died 10 years ago, not recently. Nate shook his head, fatigue making his thoughts fuzzy. But as he stared at the wedding photo, that cold feeling returned. Tom had been handsome in that quarterback way. Strong jaw, bright smile, and thick red hair that caught the camera flash like flames. Red hair. Nate's hands began to shake. He moved to the next photo. Tom at a family barbecue, his red hair tousled by wind. Another, Tom laughing at Christmas, his hair almost luminescent against the dark wood paneling. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, following the narrow hallway to a pull cord for the attic. Something compelled him upward, into the dusty darkness above. The attic was cluttered with boxes, holiday decorations, and furniture draped in white sheets like sleeping spirits. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light filtering through a grimy window. In the far corner, he found a stack of photo albums bound with rubber bands. His hands trembled as he opened the first one. More wedding photos. Tom's groomsmen, all dark-haired, except for the groom himself. Tom's family, parents, siblings, cousins. Not a single redhead among them. The second album contained older photos. 3 generations of family gatherings, birthday parties, graduations. Page after page of brunettes and blondes and the occasional gray-haired elder. Tom was the only redhead in the entire family history. Claire had lied to his face. 2 days later. "You're being paranoid," Claire snapped, bouncing Emma against her shoulder. They were back in their cramped apartment, the nursery feeling more like a prison cell than a sanctuary. "Genetics are complicated. You can't just look at some old photos and determine..." I looked through 3 generations of family albums, Nate interrupted, his voice dangerous quiet. Every single photo Julia had, Tom was the only redhead. Period. Claire's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. So what exactly are you accusing me of? Having an affair with my dead brother-in-law? That's sick, Nate. Even for you. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking questions. Well, stop asking them. Claire turned away, her shoulders rigid. Emma is our daughter. That's all that matters. But Nate couldn't let it go. The doubt had taken root, growing like a malignant tumor in his chest. That night, while Claire slept, he went through her purse with surgical precision. Her phone revealed nothing suspicious. Too clean, like she'd scrubbed it recently. But in her wallet, tucked behind her insurance card, he found a receipt. Riverside Fertility Clinic. Dated 3 months ago, for $2,400. She'd told him she was getting routine blood work that day. Just a follow-up appointment. Nothing important. But routine blood tests didn't cost $2,400. Nate stared at the receipt until the numbers blurred. Then he made a decision that would change everything. The next day, Jake Morrison had been Nate's friend since college, back when they'd both been idealistic kids who thought they could change the world. Now Jake worked in medical records at County General, and his idealism had been ground down by years of bureaucracy and insurance fraud. I need a favor, Nate said when they met at Murphy's Diner on 5th Street. The place was nearly empty, just a few truckers nursing coffee and the smell of grease hanging heavy in the air. Jake frowned, stirring sugar into his coffee. What kind of favor? Nothing illegal. I just need to know what my wife was doing at Riverside Fertility Clinic. That's confidential information, man. Patient privacy laws exist for a reason. Nate leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Jake, please. Something's not right with my daughter. I think Claire had some kind of procedure done without telling me. Even if that's true, I can't just access another hospital's records. It doesn't work that way. But you have connections. You know people. Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying Nate's face. They'd been through a lot together. College, Jake's messy divorce, Nate's struggles with the foster system. If anyone would help him, it would be Jake. I'll see what I can do, Jake said finally. But I'm not promising anything, and if this comes back on me, I'll deny we ever had this conversation. Understood. Give me 2 days. Those 2 days felt like 2 years. Nate went through the motions of normal life, changing diapers, feeding Emma, making small talk with Claire. While inside, his world was collapsing. Every time he looked at his daughter's red hair, he felt sick. Jake called on Thursday afternoon. Meet me at the Warehouse District, corner of Industrial and 3rd. Come alone. The Warehouse District was a graveyard of abandoned buildings and broken dreams. Jake's car was parked in the shadow of a defunct textile mill, his face grim behind the windshield. This better be worth it, Jake said as Nate slid into the passenger seat. I had to call in 3 favors and promise my firstborn to get this information. He handed Nate a manila folder. Your wife had 2 appointments at Riverside Fertility, both for artificial insemination procedures using donor sperm. The words hit Nate like a physical blow. The folder slipped from his numb fingers, spilling papers across the dashboard. Donor sperm? His voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Sample ID TMR05FZ10. The naming convention usually follows the donor's initials, so TM would be Tom Meadows. Nate's vision started to tunnel. Jesus Christ. There's more. Jake's voice was grim. The procedures were done 4 months ago, right around when your daughter would have been conceived. But here's the weird part. The sperm wasn't from their standard donor bank. What does that mean? It means it was a private donation. Someone specifically requested that sample be used. And someone with medical power of attorney had to authorize its release. Nate's hands were shaking as he gathered the scattered papers. Who authorized it? Julia Meadows, Tom's widow. That evening, the confrontation happened in their bedroom, with Emma sleeping peacefully in her crib just 10 feet away. Nate had spent hours planning what to say. But when Claire walked in from her shower, hair damp and wearing his old college t-shirt, the words came out in a rush. I know about the fertility clinic. I know about the donor sperm. I know about Tom. Claire froze, her brush halfway through her hair. In the mirror, Nate could see her face go white. I don't know what you're talking about. TMRR05FC10. Tom Meadows, sample ID R05, freezer unit FC10. Nate stepped closer and Claire turned to face him. You want to keep lying to me? Or do you want to tell me the truth? Claire's composure cracked like thin ice. The brush clattered to the floor. Nate, I can explain. Then explain. Explain why you used your dead brother-in-law's sperm to conceive our daughter without telling me. You wanted a baby. The words burst out of her like water through a broken dam. We'd been trying for 5 years. I was 36 years old and running out of time. So you decided to lie to me instead of discussing our options. What options? You'd already said no to donor sperm. You wanted it to be natural or nothing? Claire's voice dripped with contempt. Well, I wasn't willing to accept nothing. Nate felt like he was drowning. How long have you been planning this? It wasn't planned. It was desperation. Tears started streaming down her face. Tom's sperm was still viable. It had been stored at the clinic before he died. Julia gave permission to use it. Why Tom specifically? Out of all the available donors, why him? Claire looked away. He was family. It felt right. That's not an answer. He was a good man, smart, athletic, handsome. I thought our daughter would be lucky to have his genes. Nate studied her face, looking for tells. After 8 years of marriage, he knew when she was holding something back. There's more, isn't there? Something you're not telling me. Claire wrapped her arms around herself. I knew him. Before he died, we were close. Define close. We were friends. We talked. We understood each other. Bullcrap. The word came out harsher than he intended, and Emma stirred in her crib. You don't use a friend's sperm to have a baby behind your husband's back. What really happened, Claire? She was quiet for so long that Nate thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. We had feelings for each other, but we never acted on them. He was married to Julia. He was loyal, had feelings for each other. It was innocent, just conversations, emotional support. For how long? A few months before he died? Nate felt something cold and dark settling in his chest. So when you decided to use his sperm, it wasn't just because he was family. It was because you had feelings for him. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you found a way to have his baby without technically cheating. Claire started crying harder. You don't understand. You can't understand what it was like, wanting a child so desperately and feeling like my body was failing me. When Tom died, I was devastated. Using his sperm felt like having a piece of him back. A piece of the man you had feelings for. A piece of someone good, someone kind and decent, and someone who wasn't your husband. The words hung in the air between them like a blade. Claire's face crumpled and she sank onto the bed. I never stopped loving you, she whispered. Everything I did was for us. For our family. No, Nate said quietly. Everything you did was for you. You wanted Tom's baby, so you found a way to get it. My feelings didn't matter. Our marriage vows didn't matter. Nothing mattered except what you wanted. That's not true, isn't it? Because I'm looking at this situation and I see a woman who is so obsessed with a dead man that she used his genetic material to conceive a child, then lied to her husband about it for months. Claire looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd known her, he saw something ugly in her eyes, something desperate and selfish. She's still your daughter, Claire said. You're going to raise her and love her and be her father. The genetics don't change that. The lies do. Nate walked to Emma's crib and looked down at his sleeping daughter. Red hair, pale skin, delicate features that were already showing hints of the man who donated half her DNA. She was beautiful and innocent and completely unaware that her entire existence was built on deception. I need to know everything, he said without turning around. Every detail of your relationship with Tom, every lie you've told me, everything. Nate! Everything, Claire. Or I walk out that door and you never see me again. Claire's confession took 2 hours. She told him about meeting Tom at Julia's party, how they'd started talking about dreams, about the loneliness of being married to people who didn't understand them. It started innocently, she said, her voice hollow. Just conversations. He was unhappy with Julia. She was grieving her miscarriages. I was frustrated with our fertility struggles. For how long? 8 months before he died. We talked about leaving our spouses. The admission hit him like a punch. Why didn't you? Because we were cowards. Tom loved Julia despite their problems, and I loved you despite feeling like we were drifting apart. So what changed? Claire's face darkened. Julia got pregnant again. Tom was convinced this time would be different. He said he couldn't leave her, couldn't destroy their chance at happiness. But she lost the baby. At 12 weeks, Tom threw himself into taking care of her. He stopped taking my calls. When I confronted him, he said we needed to end our friendship. How did you handle that? Claire's laugh was bitter. Not well. I kept calling. I showed up at his work. I told him I was pregnant. Were you? False alarm. But I used it to get his attention. To make him realize what he'd be losing. That's manipulative as heck, Claire. I was desperate, but it backfired. He was furious. Said I was trying to manipulate him. Because I loved him. The words came out as a scream, and Emma started crying. Claire rushed to pick her up. I loved him more than I'd ever loved anyone. More than I loved you. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Nate felt something inside him break. The night he died, he said slowly. What happened? Claire's face went white. Nothing. He was drinking. He crashed. It was an accident, Claire. It was an accident, Nate. A terrible, senseless accident. But Nate could see the lie in her eyes. And suddenly, he knew there was more to Tom's death than anyone realized. Nate called in sick the next day and spent the morning at the public library researching Tom's accident. The newspaper archives were sparse. Just a brief mention of a single vehicle crash on Route 9. No other details provided. But the police report was more comprehensive. Tom's car had left the road at 11:47 p.m. during a thunderstorm, flipping 3 times before catching fire. His blood alcohol level was .09, just over the legal limit, but not enough to explain such a catastrophic crash. The investigating officer was Detective Bree Harmon, now retired but still living in town. Nate found her address in the phone book and drove to her modest ranch house on Elm Street. I remember that case, Detective Harmon said when Nate explained why he was there. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much. Bothered me for years. Why? Too many inconsistencies. The damage pattern suggested he'd been going over 80 miles per hour, but the skid marks indicated he'd braked hard just before leaving the road. Like something had spooked him. What could have spooked him? That's what I could never figure out. No other vehicles were involved. No animals in the area. Weather was bad, but not bad enough to cause that kind of panic. They sat in her living room, surrounded by family photos and the comfortable clutter of retirement. Detective Harmon pulled out a box of files she'd kept from her active duty. I saved copies of everything from that case, she admitted. Call it intuition, but something about it never felt right. She spread crime scene photos across the coffee table. Tom's car was a twisted wreck of metal and glass, barely recognizable as a vehicle. Here's what bothered me most, she said, pointing to a detailed shot of the engine compartment. The brake lines were severed. Nate leaned closer. From the crash? That's what the fire department concluded, but look at this. She handed him a magnifying glass. The cuts are too clean, too precise. In a crash this violent, you'd expect the lines to be crushed or torn. These look like they were cut with a blade. You think someone tampered with his car? I think someone wanted Tom Meadows dead, but I could never prove it, and the family didn't push for further investigation. Case was closed within a week. Nate studied the photos, his mind racing. What would it take to cut brake lines? Not much. Basic mechanical knowledge, access to the car, and a sharp blade. The real skill would be in making it look accidental. How so? You wouldn't cut them completely. That would cause immediate brake failure, and any competent driver would notice right away. Instead, you'd weaken them just enough that they'd fail under pressure, like sudden hard braking. So someone could drive normally for days or weeks before the right circumstances caused complete failure. Rain, alcohol, high speed, all factors that would make the inevitable crash look accidental. Nate felt sick. Who would have had access to Tom's car? Family members, close friends, anyone he trusted enough to give his keys to. What about his wife's sister? Detective Harmon's eyes sharpened. Why do you ask? Because my wife is Julia's sister, and she had an affair with Tom before he died. Holy hell. Detective Harmon sat back in her chair. You think your wife tampered with Tom's brakes? I think my wife was obsessed with him. And when he rejected her, she did something unforgivable. That evening, Nate confronted Julia at her house. She was in the kitchen making dinner, moving through the familiar routine with mechanical precision. She looked up when he entered, and something in his expression made her freeze. We need to talk about Tom's car, he said. Julia's face went pale. What about it? About who had access to it, about maintenance records, about what really happened the night he died. Nate, I don't understand. Claire had an affair with your husband. For 8 months before he died, they were emotionally involved. She was obsessed with him. Julia sank into a kitchen chair. I know. You knew? I found out 3 days before he died. Text messages on his phone, photos, hotel receipts. Her voice was barely above a whisper. They never slept together, but they might as well have. She was consuming his thoughts, destroying our marriage. Why didn't you tell me? What was I supposed to say? That my dead husband was having an emotional affair with your wife? It wouldn't bring him back. It would just hurt you. Nate sat across from her. What happened the night he died? They had dinner at Romano's downtown. I followed them. Julia's hands were shaking. I sat in my car in the parking lot and watched them argue. She was crying, begging him not to end things. He kept shaking his head, trying to calm her down. Then what? He got in his car and drove away. She sat in the parking lot for another 20 minutes, just screaming. I'd never seen anyone that angry. Did she follow him? I don't know. I went home. I was too upset to drive safely. Nate leaned forward. Julia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Did Claire ever have access to Tom's car? Julia was quiet for a long moment. She borrowed it once, about a week before he died. Her car was in the shop and she needed to get to work. Tom let her take his car for the day. Did he check it when she returned it? No, why would he? She was family. Nate felt the pieces clicking into place. Do you still have Tom's maintenance records? Everything's in his desk upstairs. He was obsessive about keeping records. They found the files in Tom's home office, a small room that Julia had left untouched since his death. The maintenance logs were meticulous, dating back to when he'd bought the car 5 years earlier. The last entry was dated 4 days before his death. Brake fluid change, owner maintenance. Tom never worked on his own brakes, Julia said immediately. He didn't trust himself with safety equipment. He always took it to Murphy's Auto for brake work. So if someone else worked on the brakes, they would have had to forge his handwriting, or... Julia's face went white. Claire always said Tom's handwriting looked like hers. They used to joke about it. Nate stared at the logbook entry. The handwriting was neat, precise, feminine, nothing like the bold scrawl in Tom's other entries. I think we need to call Detective Harmon, he said. The next morning, Nate and Detective Harmon drove to Murphy's Auto Repair, a small garage on the outskirts of town. The owner, Frank Murphy, was in his 70s but still sharp, with hands permanently stained by decades of motor oil. I remember her, Frank said when they showed him Claire's photo. Pretty blonde woman, brought in a dark blue sedan for detailing about 10 years ago, but she wanted to work on it herself. What do you mean? Detective Harmon asked. She paid for a full detail but said she wanted to do some of the work personally, said it was a surprise for her husband. I thought it was sweet, so I let her use the bay. What kind of work did she do? She spent about 2 hours under the hood, said she was checking fluid levels, cleaning the engine compartment, asked to borrow some tools. What kind of tools? Frank thought for a moment. Basic hand tools, wrenches, pliers, and she asked for something to cut with. Said she needed to trim some cable ties. You let her borrow cutting tools? Just a utility knife. Nothing fancy. She seemed to know what she was doing. Detective Harmon showed Frank the brake line photos from Tom's accident. Could these cuts have been made with a utility knife? Frank studied the images carefully. Possibly. If someone knew exactly where to cut and how much pressure to apply. It would take some mechanical knowledge, but it's not impossible. Do you have any records of this? I keep detailed logs for insurance purposes. Frank disappeared into his office and returned with a work order dated 6 days before Tom's death. Here it is, full detail, customer performed partial work paid in cash. At the bottom of the form was a signature, Claire Ellison. That evening, Nate returned home to find Claire packing. Emma was in her car seat, crying softly, while Claire threw clothes into a suitcase with frantic energy. Going somewhere? Nate asked, his voice deadly calm. Claire looked up, her face streaked with tears. I can't stay here, not with you looking at me like I'm some kind of monster. Aren't you? It was an accident! The words came out as a scream. I never meant for him to die. Nate stepped closer and Claire backed against the wall. Tell me what you did. I just wanted to scare him, make him realize how much he needed me. So you tampered with his brakes. I loosened them just a little. I thought he'd have a minor accident, maybe end up in the hospital. I'd be there to take care of him, and he'd see that I was the one who really loved him. You tried to end him, Claire. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. I didn't know it would be raining. I didn't know he'd been drinking. I never meant for him to die. Nate felt something dark and cold settling in his chest. But you let Julia live with the guilt. You let her think her husband died because of their fight. I was scared. If I told the truth, they would have arrested me. I would have gone to prison. You should have gone to prison. You eliminated a man because he wouldn't leave his wife for you. Don't say it like that. Like what? Like the truth? Nate stepped closer and Claire pressed herself against the wall. You sabotaged his car because you couldn't accept rejection. You caused his death, then used his sperm to have his baby. You're sick, Claire. You're a goddamn sociopath. Claire's face twisted with rage. I did it for us. Everything I did was for our family. You did it for yourself. You always do everything for yourself. Claire lunged at him, fingernails aimed at his eyes. Nate caught her wrists, holding her as she thrashed and screamed. You'll never love her like I do, she shrieked. She's got his blood, his genes. Every time you look at her, you'll see him. Maybe, Nate said, his voice ice cold. But I'll also see the parts you tried to destroy, the good parts. Claire went limp in his grip, sobbing. Please don't take her from me. She's all I have left of him. She was never yours to begin with. Detective Harmon arrived 20 minutes later with backup. Claire had stopped fighting, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, staring at nothing. Claire Ellison, Detective Harmon said, you're under arrest for the death of Tom Meadows and fraudulent use of genetic material. Claire didn't resist as they cuffed her. She looked at Nate one last time, her face a mask of desperation and hatred. You think you're so righteous, she said, but you'll never be the father Tom would have been. You'll never be the man he was. You're right, Nate replied. I'll never be a manipulative sociopath who ends people when they don't give me what I want. As they led Claire to the patrol car, neighbors had gathered on their porches to watch. The woman who'd seemed so perfect, so put together, was revealed as something monstrous. Julia arrived, just as the patrol car pulled away. She held Emma close, the baby's red hair bright against her dark coat. What happens now? Julia asked. Now she faces justice, Nate said, and Emma gets a chance at a real life. 6 months later, the courtroom was packed for Claire's sentencing. She'd pled guilty to second-degree homicide and fraud, avoiding a trial that would have dragged Tom's memory through the mud. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Angela Torres, stood before the judge to deliver her closing statement. Your Honor, the defendant's actions represent a level of premeditation and callousness that demands the harshest possible sentence. She didn't just end Tom Meadows in a moment of passion. She planned his demise, executed it with surgical precision, and then spent 10 years building a life based on that lie. Claire sat at the defendant's table, her face blank. She'd lost weight during her time in jail, her once perfect appearance now haggard and worn. Furthermore, the prosecutor continued, the defendant's use of the victim's genetic material without consent represents a violation of the most intimate kind. She used Tom Meadows' death as an opportunity to fulfill her obsessive fantasies, creating a child who will forever be tainted by the circumstances of her conception. Nate sat in the gallery holding Emma. The baby was 8 months old now, her red hair darkening slightly but still unmistakably vibrant. She babbled softly, unaware of the legal proceedings determining her future. When the judge asked if Claire had anything to say before sentencing, she stood slowly. I loved him, she said, her voice barely audible. Everything I did was because I loved him. Tom Meadows was the best man I ever knew, and losing him broke something inside me. I know what I did was wrong, but it came from a place of love, not hatred. The judge, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, looked at her with something approaching pity. Miss Ellison, love doesn't justify destroying someone when they won't return your feelings. Love doesn't justify lying to your husband and using a dead man's genetic material to create a child. What you call love, the court calls obsession. Dangerous, destructive obsession. He sentenced her to 25 years to life for second-degree homicide, plus an additional 5 years for fraud. She would be eligible for parole in 30 years when Emma would be an adult. As the bailiff led Claire away in shackles, she looked back at Nate one last time. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes burned with unrepentant fury. She'll ask about me someday, Claire called out. She'll want to know why her real mother isn't there. What will you tell her then? I'll tell her the truth, Nate replied. That some people love so selfishly they end up destroying everything they touch. 2 years later, Nate sat in his new living room, watching Emma take her first steps. They'd moved to a small town 50 miles away, starting fresh where no one knew their history. Julia visited often, helping to raise the niece who carried her husband's genes, but not his troubled legacy. "She's walking!" Julia exclaimed, as Emma toddled across the room, her red curls bouncing. Nate caught his daughter as she stumbled, lifting her into his arms. She giggled and reached for his face with tiny fingers. "She has his eyes. But your smile," Julia said quietly. "She has her own smile," Nate corrected. "She's going to be her own person." Emma looked up at him and said her first word, "Dada." Nate's eyes filled with tears. "That's right, sweetheart. I'm your dad, and I always will be." Emma would grow up knowing the truth about her origins, but she would also know that she was wanted and loved for who she was, not who she came from. As Nate rocked her to sleep that night, he made a silent promise to the daughter who'd cost him everything and given him everything in return. She would never know the suffocating, destructive love that had brought her into existence. She would only know the kind of love that set people free. She was home, she was safe, and she was his.